Good morning and welcome to Posturite's latest webinar. I'm delighted to say that we have Emma Wee joining us today, along with Andy and David from Posturite. Before I introduce Emma and the session, I need to remind you that this session will be being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants and will be available on our website, along with all our previous webinars. Sometimes we send the slides out too, but this time it'll be the recording alone, which you will be able to listen to. But we think it's important that you hear what is said along with the slides rather than just having the slides alone. Questions will be taken at the end of the webinar, so please could you put them in the Q&A box, and I will ask Emma as many of them as I can at the end of the session. Please could you use the chat box for anything else if you want to communicate with anyone else. That helps me to moderate it. Now, this will come as no surprise to those of you that know me that this is a subject very close to my heart, and I know it can create very strong feelings and questions. We hope that this short session is a conversation starter, and we hope there's enough information to both inform and support, but there isn't going to be the space to debate individual cases. It's such a massive subject, so please can you keep your questions of a general nature with nothing medical or too specific, because we won't be able to comment on that. So let me introduce Emma. Emma Wee is a leading neurodiversity coach who's coached over 4,500 hours of sessions, working with many conditions including menopause, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD and with autism, fibromyalgia and anxiety and depression. She has a creative approach to working with her clients, tapping into new ways of working that are specific and flexible to the needs of each person she works with. So it is with pleasure that I hand over to Emma to talk about menopause. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. Really pleased to be here. This is a subject that's also close to my heart, and I've also been working quite specifically around menopause through the coaching that I've been doing with Posturite over the last couple of years. So it's been really interesting to see the impact of our kind of work on people and on sort of actually for businesses overall in terms of kind of supporting people. I'll have to excuse myself in advance. I have got quite a sore throat, so my voice may go in and out. So just to give you a warning, there's nothing wrong with your sound, it's just my voice. In terms of what we're going to look at today, I'm going to spend some time looking at where perimenopause and menopause sits within the kind of neurodiversity kind of table, if you like, and look at kind of what that means in terms of how that might sort of interact with stuff that you already have present, and kind of where that's sitting within the impact on your kind of day-to-day functioning. I'll talk about some of the symptoms, and then we'll look at some of the ways that you can support people. I think it's quite important for people to know that going through the perimenopause, menopause is not something that should define your career. It shouldn't be the end of the road. And I think there's been a huge amount of gaslighting. It's a big societal thing. There's, the government's just kind of done a U-turn on the menopause law. I think it is really significant. It is really important for women to feel supported, and for people going through the menopause to feel supported, that they have still got something to contribute to the workforce, because it's a huge number of people who are sort of feeling as though they're not necessarily being seen and heard in the way that they should be. In terms of neurodiversity, I quite often describe neurodiversity as, everyone's got a differently wired brain. But if you think of it in terms of telephone numbers, everybody in, say, Birmingham's got the same area code. But it's the sort of combination of numbers, a sort of unique combination of numbers that will get you to a particular person or a particular brain. And I think that that's really important to look at in terms of, we're not broken, we just probably work in a different way to the person with a different phone number, if you like. And it's not up to the individual to have to fix themselves. We should be looking at inclusive, systemic change that allows people to find what they need in the workplace so they can be at their fullest potential in that moment in time where they happen to be. So it's all a journey. It's not fixed, and it's definitely something that in terms of reasonable adjustments were typically seen as a way of actively getting people out of the workplace, whereas now it's very much more seen as an investment in the person. So there are 4 different areas of neurodiversity. There's the stuff you're born with, which is the applied and clinical, and then the acquired neurodiversities. Now, the acquired neurodiversities will be things that happen to your brain later on in life. So what can happen is that if you have an applied or clinical neurodiversity, that may be kind of quite well masked, or you might have had kind of quite good strategies in place. But when you get an acquired neurodiversity, so things like perimenopause, menopause come into the transient sort of acquired neurodiversities, and that they won't be permanent, it will kind of shift in and out of your life. But it can have a significant impact on your day-to-day functioning. And when I'm working with clients, I often talk to them about what's going on in terms of their physical, intellectual, and emotional reserves in terms of how much they've got available to them in the moment. And quite often, because the acquired neurodiversities can also come with quite a lot of physical sort of impact, that means it can pull away from the other kind of resources that you might have. So that's why you might see someone struggling with self-regulation or emotional resilience, going through perimenopause, because there's so much more physical stuff going on that they have no control over quite a lot of the time. So it's about understanding kind of what's going on for you at the time. There's a lot of women at the moment who are also going through diagnostics for ADHD, who are also going through perimenopause. And there's a real dovetail into sort of in terms of kind of where the symptoms kind of cross over in terms of those things. But again, it might be that they were able to mask the ADHD up to the point where they go through perimenopause as well. There's also some evidence to suggest that long COVID can stimulate or trigger perimenopause in some women as well. So there's a lot going on in terms of kind of the acquired neurodiversity versus the kind of applied and clinical stuff. Okay. So what is it? Effectively, it's where the body starts to go through a change in kind of hormonal levels, where it starts to come to the end of a kind of what you would say sort of the body's fertile period. So it starts around about sort of early menopause, can start around sort of earlier than 42. It can, for some people, it can be triggered as part of having a hysterectomy. But essentially, the time that it can take is between 4 to 10 years. It's quite significant. It's not just women who are going through menopause. There's also kind of women who might have already been through the menopause, who have gone through cancer treatments, and then they may go through menopause again after kind of having that kind of medication. Transgender women as well can also go through the menopause when their kind of their sort of hormone treatments are stopped, or they're kind of paused, and they can also experience some of those symptoms as well. Estrogen is the big hormone that's involved in this, and essentially the drops in estrogen levels have a significant impact. And the reason why it has such an impact on kind of day-to-day functioning is that it's linked to sort of the dopamine, which is kind of the thing that kind of allows you to make the decision in the moment, and also in terms of how you kind of manage your long-term memory, but also the kind of mood regulation as well. And I think the thing is to say is, like, again, it's not as though you're broken and those things aren't going away. It's just that you probably need a few more strategies in place to bridge the gap that's been taken up by the changes in the kind of body. I think one of the problems that quite often women experience is that they feel as though they don't have any control over what's happening. They can't explain what's happening, and that can be incredibly sort of destabilizing. So the symptoms that can present, they don't all have to present at the same time. They can happen at different kind of periods during the kind of like the perimenopause. They don't always have to be kind of like the full whack the whole time. They can fluctuate, and that can make it really difficult for women to feel as though they can ask for support, because they might, I mean, I know for my case, I spent, I think, 5 years going, well, it's not that bad. I don't need to go for HRT, when in fact I could have gone a lot sooner. And I think there's a real call for, or need for, self-advocating to medical professionals and kind of the people around you, to be able to say, actually, no, something's not right. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel myself. and being able to access that support rather than being told, no, it's not for you, that you're not there yet. I think anything that is impacting you on such a significant level over such a long period of time really should be supported, so that you don't have to feel as though you're making excuses or having to justify kind of where you're at. But all of these things can be quite persistent and quite significant, to the point where you're carrying all this physical sort of processing, and that is going to pull away from the way that you're actually able to kind of think and kind of do your day-to-day work. And of course, if your body is doing something that you can't explain, then what happens is that you start to not be able to trust where you're at. So one of the things about sort of perimenopause is that there's quite often a significant amount of anxiety, unexplained anxiety. I went through a phase recently where I suddenly started going through kind of quite severe palpitations and this kind of unsettling sense of fear. And that's a very common experience for a lot of women, where you don't feel as though there's nothing to explain it. So how do you start to kind of communicate what that is? I think one of the problems is that if you're going through a period of feeling uncertain and unsettled for a very long period of time, and you can't trust what's happening between your brain and your physical body, then you start to you feel as though you're constantly under some sort of threat. And what happens in the amygdala, which manages our kind of fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain, when it becomes anxious or overly anxious for quite long periods of time, it physically enlarges. So you become more hypervigilant to the idea that you might be, something might happen or something might go wrong that you can't control. So anxiety is really common as part of that kind of experience. In terms of kind of the memory dropout and kind of being able to sort of access things that you used to be able to do without even thinking, there have been studies done on kind of the levels of estradiol in the brain, which actually causes the hippocampus, which is where you have your long-term memory, to kind of reduce in size slightly. So when I talk to people about what's going on for them, if you think about the bridge between your kind of your working memory, which is about kind of how you kind of work functioning in the moment, to your long-term memory, it's like the bridge is being pulled back slightly, because that extra capacity is being taken up by the physical processing that's going on with your body. So the memories haven't gone, you haven't lost the capacity to do those things. It's just that the bridge is being pulled back slightly, so you can't access them in the same way. And that can feel really destabilizing, because you think you can do something and then blank, it's gone. And that can impact the way you communicate. It can impact the way that you're kind of going through processes. So it can really have a significant impact on being in work. The good news is, if you get some strategies in place specifically for those things, then you can continue to kind of work and manage yourself. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in the brain, so that there's a model, if you like, or language that you might be able to explain or kind of appreciate for yourself to see where you're at. Processing speed is how much ability you've got in any given moment to do a task. Think of it as like the rev counter on your car. Car's not in gear, you put your foot down on the accelerator and that needle flies up and down. And that's how our brains fluctuate in terms of capacity during the day. Now, when you're neurodiverse, when you've got a neurodiverse condition, whether that's the applied, clinical, or transient, a certain amount of your processing is always given up to the condition. For example, if you're dyslexic, you've got approximately 40% of your available processing given up to decoding and encoding sounds. So it's roughly 25% more brain power that your brain is always doing. Now, if you add in tiredness, insomnia is a very common kind of feature of perimenopause, menopausal symptoms, anxiety, that has more of an impact on your processing speed. So you're quite often going to drop down a lot quicker in terms of your ability to do something in the moment. And that's where the frustration can really build in, because the brain is constantly dropping its processing speed. So knowing how to make the most of your processing speed, making sure that you're kind of looking after your rest, and being able to break things down in a way that you're doing the tasks that you find the most challenging at the time when your brain is at its freshest, means that you're going to be able to work a lot more efficiently. Working memory is your ability to place attention on something in the moment. Now, what you're looking at here would be the same as if you got a process that you know really well from end to end. You've got no memory loss, you've not got no memory dropout. So imagine the door opens, you've got a question that needs to be answered, and information files in one at a time. This is the same as if you were, say, for instance, hyperfocusing if you're ADHD. Everything else is really clear, you know where the end point is going to be. With neurodiverse conditions, typically speaking, you'll have a poor working memory. So it's not that like I say, it's not short-term memory, it's just how you place your attention in the moment. So if you imagine that you've got windows and doors opening and shutting all over the place, your attention can go in lots of different ways, particularly if you have sort of dropouts of kind of information. So imagine that you have a jigsaw puzzle and you chuck it up in the air. The bits that fall down that have a clear function, like the edges and the corners, you don't have to worry about those. You kind of know what those are. But with poor working memory, it's a bit like trying to do the jigsaw without the front of the box. If you haven't got enough clarity about the end point, or your memory dropout means that you're missing a few pieces, it's going to be very difficult to start that task. And that's where the moment of trying to do a task and it feels completely overwhelming kind of comes into play, because your brain is trying to process all the information to put it in order for the kind of the good working memory, but actually what's happening is that there's lots of things kind of distracting and going all over the place. The other thing, that the more saturated you are, the more tired you are, the more those windows and doors open and shut. And that can mean that it's really exhausting to try and do really big tasks, because actually your brain doesn't really have sort of the same attention span that it might have done previously. So breaking things down into not necessarily spoon-fed pieces, but making sure that you can identify the arc of a task rather than it being one huge task that you've got a process to kind of track yourself from moment to moment can be really helpful. Sound is a really big part of how we process. And in terms of, we have the phonological loop, which is on the left-hand side of the brain, to hold sounds in a loop like a conveyor belt until we've understood what those sounds are. Now, sound behind is more impactful than sound in front. There's quite often a lot of women who go through perimenopause will experience misophonia. So they'll have sounds that are really distracting and really quite intolerable in terms of kind of how much impact that has. And what can happen, particularly if you've got a lot of anxiety or a lot of internal, what I call internal noise, it's not voices in your head, just kind of internal thoughts or worries, that can effectively shorten the phonological loop. And what that then means is that you've got less capacity for holding sounds. So someone might say something, it'll go on the conveyor belt, but it'll probably drop off, and then you haven't processed it before it's kind of fallen off the conveyor belt. So that might mean that you'll need to kind of have a few goes at hearing something, or you may need to repeat it back or kind of go back and check. And that's not to do with, again, not because your brain's broken, it's just that you've got less capacity on that conveyor belt in the moment for you to pay attention to those things, for you to then kind of understand and go forward with it. So you may need to read a little bit slower. You may need to have other ways of, say, for instance, capturing notes, like for instance, and you may need to kind of slow conversations down by mirroring back to someone what they've said and saying, have I missed anything? Just so you get a few more times around on that conveyor belt with the same information until the brain has understood it. And what I found is that working with people with kind of strategies like having, if they've got to ask lots of questions or they're asking a questionnaire, having it mind mapped out so it's a visual representation, means that they're not having to hold all the information in their brain and therefore have to sort of take up all that capacity in their brain with the information. So if you were to look at it as, for instance, like a whiteboard, if you're writing constantly on a whiteboard and you're holding all that information internally and not having notes in front of you to refer to, then someone else comes with a new bit of information and suddenly there's no room on that whiteboard to do any new thinking. So decompressing, making sure that you're taking proper breaks, not thinking, oh, I'm just going to sit here and do the next thing. You know, having good boundaries between your kind of workspace and your rest space is really critical in being able to manage the impact of all this stuff going on. So simple things that can support people going through the menopause, perimenopause. again, none of this requires a huge amount of money or time. It's just about having a bit of more mindfulness or kind of awareness that, you know, an individual is going through a significant change, a significant sort of period in their life in terms of physical, mental, kind of emotional kind of upheaval. And so giving people the space to be able to kind of look after themselves from a medical perspective, making sure that you're kind of not questioning someone, why can't you do that? Just kind of think of it in terms of, well, here's a strategy, let's use this, let's kind of bridge the gap, literally, in terms of memory. And, you know, hybrid working patterns, there may be some days where someone is incredibly exhausted, not having the kind of like the pressure to go into the workspace can be really helpful in terms of kind of managing that. And, you know, women that I've worked with kind of go, thank God I don't have to go in the office, so I don't have to present myself in a way that everybody kind of thinks is kind of put together, because I'm just dealing with how I'm feeling today. Those sorts of supporting strategies can be really helpful. Some organizations are kind of really investing in their workforce. They're allowing women to have coaching, for instance, and that can be a really valuable process in terms of figuring out where your brain is at right now and what strategies you need to kind of have in place to support you. And doing it with care and empathy, without shame or blame, I think is a really necessary thing to think about in terms of if you're going to be an ally, if you're going to support someone. In terms of sort of helping other people, or rather than saying, do you think you've got, or I think you're not there to sort of, if you're a manager, you're not there to diagnose, you're not there to kind of tell someone what they're experiencing. A language that could be useful is, what I'm noticing is X, that there are issues, or you're struggling with X, Y, and Z. Do you need support around that? And I think it's really important to know that strategies, or kind of trying out new ways of working, they're not a magic wand process. They may take some time to embed. But what I've seen is that where people have got strategies that really work for them, it does huge things for their confidence, that they can control kind of the way that they're focusing, the way that they're working. And then that's better for the bottom line for the business, but also for the individual, and that they feel as though they're coming back to themselves. So it's just about being able to come alongside someone and say, you know, where are you at right now? What is it that we can offer? Without them feeling as though they're being singled out, or kind of, you know, special lights being shone on them. And I suppose that's where inclusivity really comes into play, in the sense that, you know, reasonable adjustments, things like assistive tech, or kind of, you know, sort of being able to take flexible time off for kind of medical interventions and things like that, is just part of the stationary cupboard. It's nothing that should be seen as a special treatment. It's just, how do we help people be at their best in the workplace? So in terms of kind of being able to sort of justify reasonable adjustments for perimenopause, of course, it's even though the terminology is around a disability, it's about something that impacts someone for a year plus, and that very much is where kind of perimenopause, menopause sits within. So in terms of the Equality Act, in terms of the duty of care to individuals, that's something that can be kind of supported. And again, it's not about making someone, or conflating the person with the impact of the condition. It's just about saying, we can put stuff around the condition in order to support it and help you feel better as a person within the workplace. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Andy now, and he's going to talk a little bit about what we do at Posturite.
Thanks, Emma. Morning, everyone. Emma, that's excellent. I think I'm keeping track on the chat box. There's a lot of nodding heads as you're talking through. There's a lot of people who can absolutely relate to pretty much every word. Phenomenal amount of detail. I'm learning all the time, so it was significantly helpful for a lot of people, and really talking. I think with many, there's a lot of people on this call. There's a lot of different roles. Obviously, both male and female on the call. I think it's an excellent way to start opening up the conversation here. And I think there's a lot of people on here, both personally and professional, taking a significant amount of that. So excellent. I think over the last sort of 12, 18 months, from our point of view, we've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of our clients around this subject. It's been at the forefront of a lot of our meetings. So what I wanted to do is just talk about what we're doing with a lot of our clients, how we've helped them over this period, and hopefully offer some support to a lot of organisations. So yeah, it's something that we have spoke significantly around. So how can Posturite help? A few things we've put in place with a lot of our clients. One of them is we've ran a significant amount of menopause awareness training sessions. So this can be company-wide, or it can be in smaller groups and more specific to job roles such as line managers or HR, D&I leads, etc. So we can do this remotely, which works extremely well because you can obviously get a significant amount of people on these type of calls now. You can record them for future purposes for people to reference back to. So the goal here is to start opening the conversation, is to create a culture to discuss the topic, which I think is a really key part, is to have that sort of general overview culture buy-in to say this is a conversation we're talking about. Spread awareness, spot signs, understand, and support where appropriate. And that's sort of the one thing I took out of a lot of the slides that Emma's gone through, is in terms of that supporting the individual is the real key part. So session designed to cover a detailed look into symptoms of menopause, medication, implications and legalities of company workplace adjustments. So this can be tailored to specific areas the organisation may wish to focus on, and this is discussed in great detail before the sessions take place to manage expectations of themselves and make sure we're fulfilling everything that the organisation's goal is. So in the line manager training sessions, so they're specifically aimed at what the responsibilities are and may incorporate an organisation's specific policy on the subject to help support line managers, as well as things like spotting the signs, which we've discussed, how to support individuals, which I've mentioned is a real key part, and where to go if line managers need assistance. And those sort of key questions that Emma's just mentioned are absolutely key, that can absolutely open a door for that conversation to take place. Specific team roles. So this may be aimed more at workplace adjustments, as a team may have greater knowledge, or it may be a sort of stage 2 awareness session that we can run, which will focus on to support people, how to help people going forward, and discuss those reasonable adjustments that may help. Next slide, please, Emma. So I appreciate a lot of you may use us for our workplace needs assessments for neurodiverse conditions, which we cover for a lot of you. We can do them specifically for menopause. So whereas the awareness courses are for a overview, they're very much focused on individual, any barriers they are facing relating to not only their job role and of course general, and concentrating on those barriers is key. And we see that with a lot of workplace assessments we do generally, that we don't really need to get too focused on a diagnosis. What we need to do is focus on the barriers to overcome and support an individual should they need it. So this covers the individual's needs, symptoms, possible future symptoms, to be able to make recommendations to assist the employee to continue working with the support of their employer, and we can engage the employer where appropriate, and that's dependent on the circumstances. Next slide, please, Emma. And following a workplace needs assessment, there's obviously many outcomes that may come from these within a recommendation report. One of those recommendations may be one-to-one coaching, strategic coaching with an individual. This can be multiple sessions if required. This is often sort of just an individual allows us to develop personalised workplace strategies for them. So we can spend time with the individual in order to gain an understanding of their role, which is and the key tasks expected of them. So this allows us to suggest a range of practical strategies and support around areas such as stress management, time management, concentration, organisational skills, many areas that may be impacted. So that's a sort of quick overview really of a few things that we are doing. I think the key message is having that initial conversation to manage expectations of what you want us to help you with, and having that conversation is a real key area to make sure that that's filled. So if you do wish to speak to us in a bit more detail in terms of anything that we have spoke about, then please do email us. I think the email address on the next slide is enablement@posturite.com. Posturite.co.uk, so we can reach out to you with some information, availability. You want to have a conversation like this, if you want the team to reach out to you, then please get in touch. I think hopefully, Emma, that's given you a little, throat a little rest for the many questions that I think are on the way.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Emma. Yes, we've got a very busy Q&A and very, very busy chat. I'm going to try and bring some of the questions together into some of the sort of topics so everybody gets an answer. And I think the first one we've got, which a lot of people are interested in, is they're talking about, since the symptoms are fairly broad and similar to a number of conditions, how do you know it's definitely menopause or perimenopause? Although perhaps I would say is, or actually, does it matter? So Emma, over to you to sort of give them some guidance, I think, in general on this.
I don't think it really matters in the sense that if you're kind of experiencing, like I said before, the kind of the telephone number effect of kind of like the combination of those things. And I think one of the things that particularly the point that I went to the doctors, and I was very lucky, my first doctor was completely on it, going, right, okay, we're going to send you for blood tests, we're going to figure out what's going on. And I also had an underactive thyroid slightly at that time as well. So they figured that out first, because some of those symptoms can really kind of be very similar to perimenopause, sorted that out. And then I was still feeling rubbish. So they were like, right, okay, let's kind of definitely investigate that as well. But I've also had doctors who kind of go, are you sure you're going through it? I'm like, don't feel like myself. I feel like I'm scraping the barrel of existence here. Yes, I need something because I cannot go on like this. And that's where I was saying, so keep pushing. Like if you get a doctor who's just going, no, I don't think it's real. It's like, well, you know yourself. If you're not feeling yourself and you haven't felt yourself for a really long time, and there's no other reason for that, then push back, keep getting that support, ask for the support. Because the level of education in the medical practice sort of profession around perimenopause and menopause is not that good. So they need us to speak out, and they need us to say, this is what I present, this is what's going on for me. I need something to help me kind of get back to kind of where I need to function, because this is not working, this is not sustainable.
Yeah, I think you're as I say, it's saying I am not right, isn't it? And please, can you provide some support? There's a lot of questions about tips for educating colleagues, I think particularly around male colleagues, people have mentioned. Have you got any tips to how we can spread the word within and the knowledge within our workplaces?
I think it's, one of the things that women quite often experience is this really severe lack of confidence and not wanting to be seen as capable. And that's one of the problems about trying to self-advocate, is that you feel as though you're making yourself vulnerable to criticism or kind of the possibility of being let go. And I think if you can educate yourself and go, this is definitely what's going on for me, and I need the organization to support me so I can get back to where I was in terms of my functionality, then it's about the language that I typically get people to say it uses. What works best for me is, this means that I can, not I can't do this because I'm feeling rubbish and I'm having hot flushes. What works best for me is having, say, kind of cool pads that I can put under my chair. This will mean that I can stay focused on what I'm writing. So it becomes about a solution that has a tangible impact on both the individual and the business, rather than it being someone feeling as though they're making excuses. So if you can find that language, if you can identify the things that are going to work for you, then you can start to kind of have those conversations without feeling vulnerable.
And is that really where the sort of, I suppose, the coaching comes in, is to help people? And then as we all have better conversations, that helps the whole workforce, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the prime things that I've noticed is about where women are placing boundaries. They get to a certain point where they're kind of just used to carrying the load for everyone, whether they're carers, kind of mothers, parents, all of that stuff. And that expectation that you're just going to keep on carrying all that stuff, when actually you're losing quite a lot of capacity because of the physical stuff that's going on. And that's exhausting. And I think one of the things that I've seen, just as a really simple thing, is where I say, just give yourself the permission to take a break once in a while and push back on things that people are asking you to do, just to give yourself some more capacity. And I think that's a really big thing that I work on within the coaching, is understanding, okay, what resources have you got? Where do we need to find the extra capacity? Where are the things that you can push back on without it you feeling as though, oh, people are just going to say I'm being kind of difficult? Because it's not about that. It's just about being more efficient, and it's just about being better in yourself.
Yeah. There's a lot of good information in the chat. People are sharing their personal stories and things they found helpful. Emma, are you able to sort of maybe signpost people as to where to find good information to provide some support for them? Maybe some websites or some things that we signpost people to.
I mean, it's quite tricky, isn't it? Because there's such a lot of, I think there's quite a lot of sensationalism around menopause at the moment. Sort of a lot of people kind of sort of point towards Davina McCall as kind of like shining a light on it all. And I think those things are quite useful. I think that it's sort of, organizations that are looking to support, I mean, sort of is it Additional, which is quite good because they've got quite a lot of articles about ADHD and menopause, and they've got some really good information there, kind of how menopause and perimenopause presents, actually, not just in kind of neurodiverse kind of individuals, but kind of the general population as a whole. I think it's quite difficult to say where the good information is, because I don't think there's a lot of, some of the kind of sites will just go, embrace it all, it's all wonderful. And I said to someone, it's really difficult to embrace something where you can barely pull your head off a keyboard and you just want to sleep under the desk all the time. So if you're going to be looking for information, look for it in a place that feels as though it resonates for you, not that you should be it's not aspirational. It needs to feel as though it's kind of real, and that you recognize your experience in it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tips for colleagues, if you're aware that your colleague is going through this, is there any ways that we as a good colleague, good friend can help people?
I think actually just giving them the time to talk about what's really going on for them and express the problems or the vulnerabilities they may be feeling, because it might be that together you can create a strategy or a support system. Not being able to share how you're feeling, I think, is a really big deal for a lot of women, because they feel as though they need to mask that a lot. So yeah, just being able to have space or hold space for someone in a way that is supportive and kind, rather than kind of going, you're right, you just seem to be flapping your hands around a lot.
Oh yes. In an ideal world, what sort of policies and procedures do you think our employers should be having in place to try and get some sort of uniform support, or some way that people feel confident in being able to access support within their workplace?
I think sort of some things that I've seen that have really helped, like I said, the coaching that I've done with kind of some of our clients has been incredibly helpful, and it's sometimes only a couple of sessions just for them to be heard, just to look at the way that they're working and kind of find different ways of doing that without feeling as though they're kind of, they need to be ashamed or any of that stuff. I think letting staff know that they're not going to be let go just because they're going through something that's quite tricky, giving it the same kind of respect, if you like, as a lot of other conditions might get. Sort of it's a, if someone needs to kind of necessarily have time off to go to kind of appointments, or I know some organizations are now putting into their kind of private healthcare kind of plans for individuals to pay for things like diagnostics and to pay for kind of medications and stuff. A big one for me would be actually, when HRT runs out in various clinics, I think there needs to be some sort of centralized kind of information hub where women don't have to go running around looking for an HRT in 16 different chemists because they've run out. I know there's a kind of medical sort of medication shortage anyway, but the panic that can happen when you think you can't continue your medication is really significant, and I think that's incredibly unfair on women. So organizations that maybe kind of have access to that kind of sort of network of kind of information would be really helpful, I think.
Okay. Do you think that mandatory menopause training for managers is a good idea?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a nice quick answer, isn't it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's half your workforce, and if you're completely in denial that this is going to happen. I mean, I know there was a question that came through earlier in the week about the andropause, which is what some men can experience similar symptoms to the menopause. What I would say to that is, though, the number of women who go through the menopause with no impact and no kind of symptoms is probably about as rare as the andropause, right? So every woman who goes through the menopause is going to have some sort of impact, whether it's significant or small. Everybody's going to go through it. So if that's half the population of your workforce, then yeah, you better get tooled up.
I mean, and realistically, how long would this training be for an average employer, for a manager? I mean, are we talking days, weeks, hours? Let's just give the guys an indication as to what we're actually suggesting.
I mean, I think that 2-3 hours where you have a kind of conversation and you understand thoroughly what's going on, with some strategies that you can then go into the workplace with, so that you've got that sort of a toolkit, if you like, and then maybe checking in a few months later to see how that's going for both the employees and for the manager. I think that would kind of make sure that you're kind of checking in, doing the right thing. Ultimately, you're going to see it's working right from your cohort, isn't it?
I was going to say, I mean, and that's not a lot of investment for the potential improvements you'll see from a pure return on investment point of view. I mean, let alone keeping, as you say, a lot of your workforce in a good place. Questions about specific symptoms and whether the menopause exacerbates them. And I think it might be worth, I think you covered a little bit in your slides, but it might be worth just going over potentially, how going through the menopause and pre-existing or other conditions work together or don't work together.
Yeah. Well, I think if you've got sort of the physical kind of things, I mean, if you're not sleeping, that's going to massively impact your ability to function day to day. A classic in, I think, perimenopausal sleep pattern is falling asleep for 2 hours, waking up for the next 4, and then getting another 2 at the end of the night. That's kind of classic. And how do you function on that? It's really tough. And if that goes on for years, then that's really difficult. Sort of things like, I noticed that quite a lot of people talking about allergies. I went through a whole phase where I was like, I've got all the kind of the worst things about being pregnant, but I'm not actually pregnant. And, something like a mosquito would bite me and I blow up like a Zeppelin. It was just stuff that you wouldn't expect to be happening. And I think that kind of a lot of those things, because a lot of symptoms are quite personal, and then if they're fluctuating in and out, then that can be quite difficult. I think one of the things that a lot of the clients, that, because I almost exclusively work with neurodiversity, is that where I get women who are coming and say, I'm dyslexic, or I'm ADHD, or kind of I have this, and actually it seems to have got worse recently, and I'm going through the perimenopause, almost as an afterthought. It's like, well, yeah, it's all part of the same picture. And like I say, you'll develop strategies naturally throughout your life, but then you get something like perimenopause and like, well, that's a whole new ball game that you weren't expecting, and you didn't know. Well, there's nothing in the books, there's no one's talking about it, no one's telling you how to kind of manage that. So that then becomes kind of really can become very overwhelming.
No, that's great. A very practical question. The one-to-one coaching, is there a level of confidentiality with this?
Oh, always. I mean, God, yes. I mean, sort of the coaching, I always say to individuals, it's like, I have zero agenda for the business that you work for. My time with the individual is about getting the best for them. And, even if they move on knowing that it's right for them, and not because they're being kind of ousted because they're not fit for the business. It's absolutely, I think it's sort of the beauty of doing the kind of coaching that we do, is that it's probably the most tailor-made CPD that you'll ever go through, because it looks at everything in terms of how you're working, when you're working at times a day, what you're doing to set yourself up. It's a very, I hate to use the word holistic, but it does very much genuinely look at the whole picture, because I always say my job is about teasing out the strands of spaghetti and kind of going, right, that part of your brain needs this and that part of your brain needs this. So you have a context for why things are going on, happening for a particular time. So you've got control over it again.
Yeah, I think one of the things that resonates, or it seems to resonate with a lot of people in the chat and with myself, is, this is something additional. You've got to give yourself some space. You've only got so much capacity, and no matter what it is that's using that capacity, you need to free it up, don't you? So I think it's quite interesting. Have you been to an employer who you would say, I mean, I don't want the name of the employer, but who does it well? And anything that you can say, actually, I was so impressed because they were doing this. I mean, obviously, can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, so I've been working with Motability, who's one of our clients for, like I say, the last couple of years. And the amount of investment they've made in terms of opening up the conversation, letting any woman who works for them say, I would like some extra support, and just kind of handing out strategy coaching, allowing them to kind of have fans. It's not an issue. It's, stuff is in the stationery cupboard almost. And I think that's where, that needs to get to, because particularly it was a big thing for them, because I'd say probably 70% of their kind of call center are female, so and of a certain age, so they really kind of needed to make sure that and they have high expectations, so they needed to make sure people are on top of their game. And just in the women that I've worked with, they've had a massive journey, like in a very short period of time, just to be heard, just to be seen. I think is almost the biggest kind of stepping point for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of things coming through at the moment asking about how people can get coaching with Emma and that type of thing. We will be sending details out after the webinar, so we won't be responding to that individually, but please, we will be sending that information out to you, so don't need to worry about that. Oh gosh, there's so many interesting questions on there. Andy, have you got anything, or David, that you want to particularly that you think be helpful for our listeners?
From myself, no. I think it's very thought-provoking from my point of view, and I think making sure that we're engaging in conversation is great. We're having a lot of similar queries, in actually wanting to read in the comments. We want something. What do we do? And we're seeing this with a lot of organisations. So I'd repeat what Kat just mentioned about we'll send some information out, and we're very fortunate that we've got the resources to be able to help a lot of organisations. So yeah, just get in touch.
Okay. I mean, there is just one question I've noticed, which is an interesting one actually, and I'll be just. Does diagnosed menopause come under the Equalities Act? Now, I would have a view on that. I wonder if we're on the same page as that one, Emma.
Well, I think sort of, the definition of something that comes under the Equality Act is something that a condition that impacts you, physical and mental impairment for 12 months or more. Yes, absolutely. The thing that kind of boggles the brain, the fact that the government did a U-turn or kind of rejected the menopause law, is that they said it was discriminatory towards men. It doesn't matter, women are significantly impacted by this period in their lives for sometimes up to a decade. That's significant. And of course, the kind of reasonable adjustments and kind of the Equality Act is about leveling the playing ground for everybody. And why should one half of the population just work so much harder? I mean, we do anyway, we get paid less anyway, but that's beside the point. But in terms of kind of physical, mental kind of resources, why should we just need to keep working harder and harder when actually there is stuff there that can help?
I mean, I would also say, I mean, again, it's sort of like, do we want the label? Because you're surely you're going to be supporting the person. They're doing a better job for you anyway. So yeah. For me, to a degree, it's an irrelevance. If anybody is finding a barrier at work, you would want to remove that barrier, wouldn't you? I mean, if you're getting somebody there. So fine. I'm conscious. I don't want to wear out Emma's voice too much. So I think I hope we've answered generally the questions, the generalized questions. I don't think I've missed too much there. So I think I'm going to sort of bring this webinar to a close. I want to thank everybody for listening. To remind you, you'll be getting the recording of the webinar, and we'll send out the various information about how you can get coaching and that sort of thing. So really, I just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you, Emma. I do hope you feel better soon.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing everybody on our next webinar. Please sign up to get notifications for that. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone. Well done, Emma.